Well, kia ora tātou, everyone. Greetings to you all. Haere mai, welcome to this webinar, which is a delight to have you. And we certainly, it's certainly a topic that has interested many people. We've had a lot of registrations for this webinar. And I'm delighted to introduce to you Associate Professor Dr. Fiona Lithander. Fiona is one of those people that when you introduce her, you become breathless because there is so much that she has done. So this is just a summary that I've prepared to try and introduce you, Fiona, to the group that's gathered today. Is an Associate Professor in Nutrition, a dietitian, and Associate Director of Research at the Liggins Institute at the University of Auckland. Fiona has a specific interest in the interaction between dietary intake and the development and progression of chronic conditions, including Parkinson's disease. Fiona's other research interests are in both healthy and clinical populations and has led research groups in Ireland and Australia. She has a focus on short and medium-term outcomes after dietary interventions of bioactives, nutrients, food, and dietary patterns. Fiona completed a PhD in nutritional physiology at the University of Cambridge in the UK and holds an honorary academic appointment at the University of Bristol in the UK. Now, when one of my conversations with Fiona, I learned something that I didn't know before. And that Fiona is rare in that she is both a registered dietitian and a registered nutritionist, and that is not very common. So there's a distinction that you might not have realized before, and it might be something new that you've learned today already. But Fiona, it's just a delight to have you at this webinar. As I say, a huge response. We purposely put it here at the traditional lunch hour. In this modern world, do we still take a lunch hour? Do we just grab and go, or do we just skip lunch completely? And is that a good idea? We're here, we're all ears. And as I said earlier, if you have a question at any time, just pop it into the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we'll spend some time at the end with Fiona answering those questions. So over to you, Fiona. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'm absolutely delighted to be here this afternoon. So let me just share my slides and let me do this. And Andrew, can you give me a thumbs up if you could see those, and if it all looks good your end? Amazing. Thank you, Andrew. So thank you, Andrew, for the very kind discussion. It was a few months ago that you and I had a chat, Andrew, and you suggested that that I give this webinar. I think we were at one of the Parkinson's education days a few months ago, and we've talked a little bit over the last few months, and we decided today really to the approach I would take would be to translate the nutrition science really into everyday practice. So this webinar today is very practical. I've got lots of practical tips for you that is embedded in the science and evidenced by the science. So as Andrew said, I'm based at the University of Auckland. I am a registered dietitian, and I'm also a registered nutritionist. So if you would like to, as we go through the webinar, I'll talk about different dietary strategies that would be potentially useful for you. But if you think, gosh, I would like to see somebody to talk about it one-to-one, a dietitian is a really good option. So you'd be looking for a dietitian, and I have a slide at the end which shows you how to find a dietitian in New Zealand in your geographical area, because I know on the webinar today we've got people have joined from all over the country, and I'm absolutely delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you today. So I'll have that information towards the end if you want to get a pen ready, but similarly I can pass that information on to Andrew and he can disseminate it to you. So as Andrew mentioned, I'm based at the University of Auckland, and I have a brilliant, look, I'm the person that's here today, but work with a brilliant team of researchers, students, medical students, PhD students, master's students, all doing brilliant work in the area of nutrition and Parkinson. So I'm the one who comes along and delivers the talk, but I'm just leading a brilliant team of people. And Andrew, as Andrew said, we've timed this perfectly for lunch. You mentioned, do we take lunch hour these days? Hopefully, I'm hoping that everybody's either had their lunch, or you never know, I might inspire some of you to make a slightly suggestion for your lunch after this webinar, something that you mightn't have thought of choosing for your lunch that you probably do have in your cupboard. So timely to have timed this for lunchtime, yeah, I think we'll kick off. So I think we are entering a new era. And I just want to really open with the fact that we are entering a new era around sort of non-drug approaches to Parkinson's. So I'm just going to present you with a few different suggestions just to start off. So this is what I've got in the box here is a research paper. You'll notice there's a name B.R. Bloom. So that's Professor Baz Bloom, who came to the Parkinson's New Zealand conference that some of you may have attended in the last number of months, and this is a research paper that really has opened the door to really encouraging us to consider that we are entering a new era. So the suggestion amongst researchers, amongst neurologists like Baz Bloom, is that despite decades of research, there's really been no breakthroughs in drugs that can modify disease therapies in Parkinson's. And we know that the standard medication for motor symptom control that many of you will be taking is levodopa. So really amongst the research community, amongst, I've talked to many of you in the past, and you've been so accommodating and willing to give me your information around your Parkinson's. So it's not just researchers, it's people with Parkinson's, caregivers, other stakeholders. There's really a shift towards these non-drug approaches, these non-pharmacological approaches. And those non-pharmacological approaches are things like diet and exercise, for instance. Other ones I've got listed on the slide: physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech and language therapy. So this particular paper, published by Baz Bloom and others, that came out just at the end of 2024, suggests that we absolutely are entering a new era, and we're becoming more and more aware, and not only people with Parkinson's, caregivers, but the doctors, your doctors looking after you, and other healthcare professionals and researchers, that we really need to focus on these non-drug approaches like physical therapy, exercise, diet, occupational therapy. So times really are changing. In addition to that one, we also had another research. It's sort of not a research area, not a research paper, but you'll see on the slide it's a sort of guidance for clinical practice. And this also came out at the end of 2024. And the authors of this one, we've got Rachel Dolan, and Rachel now is the principal medical advisor in the Michael J. Fox Foundation, and Jennifer Goldman, Professor Jennifer Goldman, who's a neurology doctor. And again, it just highlights to you this growing interest in lifestyle approaches. And what they say is that, yes, we have medical and surgical treatments that can ease symptoms, but like I said a moment ago, these proven therapies to slow or to stop disease progression are lacking. And in this particular paper, what they did was said we really need to focus more on nutrition, physical activity, sleep. So this particular paper was written for neurologists in mind. It was published in a journal called Practical Neurology. So really encouraging neurologists to consider these lifestyle factors like nutrition, physical activity, and sleep when looking after and caring for their patients. And they're saying that, yes, we know that there's incredible research continuing to find drugs that actually slow the progression and maybe stop disease progression. There's brilliant research ongoing looking for a cure. But meanwhile, there is absolute growing interest in these lifestyle approaches. And I just really want to highlight to this group that there's that sort of shift in thinking. We were invited, so our research group here at the University of Auckland, we were invited to write another research paper in this area. So this was an invitation to write one looking again at the effect of diet on Parkinson's disease. And this was published just last month, so just in Actually, not quite last month. It was published in August 2025, so a couple of months ago. But again, having received this invitation to present at a conference and then publish in this UK medical journal suggests that really very much the dial is shifting to some extent to really highlight that it is important that we look at things like nutrition. And just to bring home that point, what I did was I just wanted to highlight to you that the number of research papers in the area of nutrition and Parkinson's is absolutely on the increase. So you don't need to look at the numbers here, but just the slope. You'll see from 1961. I don't know why it starts in 1961, but when I had a look at PubMed, which is where all the research papers get published in the area of biomedical sciences, starts in 1961. Maybe that's when the records start, right through to 2025. And I know we're still only early October, so it's quite likely that more research papers that inform, it really inform guidelines, inform practice is very much on the increase. And since 2000, we've had since the year 2000, we've had 2,500 research papers published in the area of nutrition and Parkinson's. So I expect 2025, the last vertical column on the right-hand side of the slide, I expect that'll be higher than 2024 because there is more to come. So I think we're in very much a time of hope and a time of increased interest from researchers, people with Parkinson's, other stakeholders, clinicians, neurologists, geriatricians, etc., basically fundamental researchers that there is this important whole lifestyle side of things, including nutrition, that's really important for us to look at. So with that context, with that in mind, what I'd like to do is talk you through the plan for the webinar. So we're going to talk about some very practical things that I really want you to consider and maybe take away some nuggets of advice from. And one question I'm going to ask you right at the end is what one change you might make to your eating and drinking, or it might be some other point that I make. What one change might you make in response to this webinar? So as we go through, maybe kind of think if something sort of clicks with you and you think, I could maybe do that, and that might improve this a little bit. So just bear that in mind as we go. So we're going to talk about weight, and weight is something that comes up a lot. And I really want to highlight why it's so important in Parkinson's. So why our body weight is so important in Parkinson's. Then we're going to talk about dietary protein and levodopa. Many of you take levodopa, and I know there's often a little bit of confusion around consuming foods and drinks that have got protein in them and how that interacts with your medication, and some tips around that. Then we're going to talk about gut health, because many people, having been out and about and spoken to many of you, many people time and time again talk about gut health, in particular constipation. So we're going to take a real dive into dietary fiber. Then I'm going to tell you so all of this is all the latest nutrition research. Then we're going to talk about supplements and dietary patterns. And then when I was writing these slides, I said, and then 3 takeaways. Now, I don't mean takeaways as in takeaways that you might have as a meal. It's takeaway tips. But yeah, that's a bit of a pun on that. So first thing we're going to have a look at is weight. And we're going to have a look to see, why is it important for you with Parkinson's to maintain a healthy weight? So we know that, so lots of studies have been done looking at weight and body mass index. Sorry, I should have put BMI as body mass index, which is a relationship between your weight and your height. So many studies have been done that have looked at body mass index and also weight in people with Parkinson's compared to people without Parkinson's. And all of these studies have actually shown that people with Parkinson's tend to be lower in weight, tend to have a lower weight than those people without Parkinson's. And in fact, there was one project done a few years ago, and they took the results from 7 different studies, pooled it all together, and again showed the same thing, that there's lower weight and lower body mass index in people with Parkinson's than people without Parkinson's, and actually showed that there's greater disease severity is associated with a lower weight. So greater disease severity associated being a lower weight. And being a low weight sort of is associated with a variety of things. For instance, it increases your risk of malnutrition, and I'll get on to what that is in a moment. It's associated with a less good quality of life, so reduced quality of life, greater Parkinson's severity or disease severity, I've mentioned, worsened cognitive symptoms, and a higher risk of death, interestingly. And we did a study, so Andrew mentioned at the start that I have an honorary position, very fortunate to work with some people at the University of Bristol. There's a research group that I used to work, when I was based in the UK, I used to work at the University of Bristol with a brilliant research group in the area of Parkinson's. And one study that we did, so we recruited several hundred people with Parkinson's and sort of followed them over time. And again, in that study, and we've published this, I'm very happy to make it available if you want to have a look at. So it's one of the few studies that looked at sort of the trajectory of weight changes over the course of the disease. And what we found was that weight loss tended to accelerate about 3 or 4 years after diagnosis. And that really is sort of the first study that has shown that there's a sort of a change point after which weight loss tends to accelerate. And I'll get to a slide in a moment as to, well, let me move on to the next slide as to what are the causes of weight loss in Parkinson's. And there are many, and some of these might actually sort of, you kind of think, oh yeah, now that makes sense. Many of you I know will be on a variety of different types of medication, and many of those medications have all sorts of side effects that can really impact on your eating. And some of those medications you're taking may just make you feel a bit nauseous, may make you want to vomit, or even you may vomit, are associated with diarrhea, constipation. So those kind of gastrointestinal side effects are really quite grim. And obviously, when you have those kind of side effects, you're not going to feel like you want to eat. So therefore, you eat a bit less and may lose some weight. And then there's things like dry mouth. And in fact, what we see in Parkinson's is some people have dry mouth, other people have too much saliva produced. So there's two things that can happen. And both of those things can be quite problematic. They can be as I say, a side effect of medication, but can make eating and drinking really quite difficult. So therefore, you might eat a bit less. Tiredness, another thing, many of the medications have a side effect of daytime sleepiness. So if you're tired, sleeping in the day, maybe a meal might get skipped, or sometimes an afternoon snack might get skipped, and therefore eating a bit less over the medium term or the long term can actually lead to weight loss. So that's one thing, these side effects of medications. Secondly, some people report difficulty chewing and or difficulty swallowing. So chewing can become a little bit more difficult for some people. Again, if you have difficulty chewing, then again, you might eat a bit less, contributing to weight loss. Swallowing can be quite problematic, and some people have said to me, gosh, I'm worried about choking. I'm embarrassed maybe in public, in a restaurant or in a cafe, therefore I might eat a bit less because I'm worried about choking and coughing and what have you. So those kind of things can contribute to weight loss in Parkinson's. Then, of course, tremor and involuntary movement, having that additional movement can actually increase the amount of calories you actually expend. So it's on the expenditure sort of side of the equation. By moving a bit more, you burn more calories. Therefore, that can contribute to weight loss. And then there's all the practical problems that some people face, going about shopping for food. Might be difficult for some people as mobility decreases. Food preparation might become more difficult as dexterity decreases or what have you. Or even preparing a meal can become difficult. Keeping food hot while you're eating, because it can become everything can get a little bit slower, including eating a meal. So therefore, just might be not as nice if it gets a bit cold. So weight loss can be an issue. And I just really wanted to kind of highlight some of the causes of that weight loss, which is why these studies have reported time and time again that people with Parkinson's tend to be a lower weight and also tend to lose weight across the sort of as the disease progresses. So a few top tips, what can you do? So Andrew mentioned it a moment ago again in the introduction about lunch and have we got to the point in life where we might, skip a meal or what have you. And I'm saying just be mindful to, if you are losing weight, try having 3 meals a day and maybe a couple of snacks between meals. And I can give some suggestions of snacks at the end if people would like some suggestions of snacks. Some people say to me, oh, I have feelings of fullness. So, I don't feel terribly hungry. My appetite isn't great. So on the second bullet point there, I've kind of got some suggestions of drinks that can be good, because you might say, oh, I don't feel like some solid food. So a milkshake, and you can make a milkshake or a smoothie at home by popping into a blender some yogurt and some milk and maybe some fruit, for instance, or a malted drink. I know in New Zealand you like to have things like Milo and Ovaltine or Oval Maltine, or even, a milky coffee, something like that actually, or a milky drink, glass of milk even, that actually is a liquid rather than a solid. And then some people again say to me, oh, but I don't want to have to increase the amount of food I eat. But what you can do is you can put extra things into the food you already eat. So for instance, if you're having, I don't know, some mashed potatoes, you could put some cheese in or put a bit of extra butter in. So you're not necessarily increasing the portion size. On the other side, then, I'm overweight. What can I do? And you might say, but surely is that a good thing? Well, I guess we all know the importance of exercise, and there's plenty of evidence and plenty of research now that has pointed towards the importance of exercise for balance and gait and those sorts of things. And carrying a bit additional weight might actually mean you're not as able to do the exercise that we know has been proven to be really useful for symptoms. So a few tips here: maybe change the method of cooking. So instead of frying, try maybe grilling or microwaving some foods. Snacks like yogurts and nuts and fruit instead of cakes or biscuits. And then maybe if you have some sugary drinks, maybe swap those for the sugar-free drinks. So just highlighting, I guess, both sides of the coin with some tips of things you might be able to do. Bear in mind that when we lose weight, we often, and this is not only for people with Parkinson's, it's everybody. When we lose weight, we lose a few different things. We lose fat, but we can also lose some muscle. And losing muscle, it happens when we lose weight, and it's very difficult not to, but that's not such a good thing. So when we lose muscle mass, so the amount of muscle, but we can also lose the strength in the muscles that we have. And there's a term, I don't know if you've come across it, called sarcopenia. And really what that word means is changes in muscle strength and muscle mass. And it happens with age. So Parkinson's or no Parkinson's, as we get older, we lose muscle strength and muscle mass. So that happens, as I say, with age. So peak muscle mass in our 20s, and then as we get a bit older, we lose muscle mass every decade, muscle strength and muscle mass. And then actually after the age of 70, and there's a loss of about 15% of muscle mass per decade. That is in people without Parkinson's as well as people with Parkinson's. So that's a normal part of aging. Our muscle strength and our muscle mass decreases. We do see that in people with Parkinson's, and there's been quite a bit of research in that area. It's kind of complicated by the fact that researchers can't agree on the definition of sarcopenia. I won't even go down that rabbit hole, but just to highlight that sarcopenia, or that loss of muscle strength and mass, does happen, has been seen in people with Parkinson's as well. It's natural. It's something that occurs with aging, but it's not a good thing. And what are the consequences of changes or decreases in muscle strength and mass? Well, it can affect our ability to perform daily activities. So if you imagine you lose some strength or you lose some muscle mass, our ability to do our activities, the things we enjoy, like walking, getting up from a chair, lifting objects, walking up the stairs, all of those, our ability to perform those kind of activities do decrease if we lose, when we lose weight, we lose some muscle as well as some fat. So just really want to highlight the importance of maintaining a healthy weight. And you might say to me, well, what is a healthy weight? That's something to have a chat with your GP about. That's something that they'll be able to discuss with you. But what I do suggest, just have a cup of tea on the go here. What I do suggest is when you go to see your GP and when you do go to see your Parkinson's specialist, suggest that they do pop you on the scales, and they will have a scales in their clinic. So really suggest that every time you go in, that they pop you on the scale so that you get, they'll be able to track your weight over time. The other thing is you might not have your own weighing scales at home, and that's absolutely fine. Many people don't, but you might be able to tell by, I don't know, the waistline of your trousers or the waistline of your skirt. Is that getting a little bit loose? Or sometimes, you know, if you wear a jewelry like a watch or a ring, you might notice that they're becoming a bit looser. Or somebody might, you know, people often pass comments, don't they, and say, gosh, you might have looked like you've lost a bit of weight about your face or what have you. So it is something in particular in Parkinson's to keep an eye on. So I've highlighted before, exercise is really important for muscle health, but so is nutrition, and so is sort of eating well to try to maintain a healthy weight, because what we often see is weight loss over time, and that's something that we really I want you to keep an extra close eye on for the reasons that I have described. Okay, so we're going to park that one, but as Andrew mentioned, if you have any questions around weight, do feel free to put them in the chat, and I'm very happy to answer those at the end. So we're going to move on to the next thing, which is dietary protein and levodopa medication. And I know that many of you do take levodopa medication. I just want to really make this point again, because it is something that comes up time and time again when I speak to people. And I thought I'd put up a slide as which foods and drinks contain protein. And we've got fish. So we've got the plant sources of protein. You can see nuts and lentils and chickpeas. And then we've got the animal sources of protein. So we've got, so all dairy foods, so milk, yogurt is another one that's not in the picture. I've got some cottage cheese, and then we've got, you know, fish and eggs and red meat. And there's some prawns and what have you on the slide. So they're the foods and drinks that contain protein. And often when we think of protein containing foods, we forget the drinks. So don't forget that drinks like milk and some of the milky drinks I mentioned earlier do also contain protein. So just want to start this bit of the talk by just everybody getting on the same page as around which contain protein. We do know that the protein in the food we eat competes with the levodopa for absorption. So if you take levodopa with a meal, that levodopa can actually be less well absorbed. And it happens at two places. So first of all, in your intestines. So when the levodopa, because you take it as a tablet form, most of you, and it goes into your intestine, and it can compete with the protein in the food that you've eaten at the same time, if it's taken with a meal or with a snack that contains protein. And secondly, when the levodopa makes its way in the bloodstream up to the brain, it cannot cross, not that it can't cross the blood-brain barrier, but there's transport of the levodopa across the blood-brain barrier into the brain may be decreased if you take your levodopa with a meal or a snack that contains protein. But if you take it on an empty stomach, it's much better, because the levodopa can then sort of enter your circulation and get into the brain where it's metabolized into dopamine, which is what we want. So the advice is generally advised to take Parkinson's medication, your levodopa medication, about 30 to 45 minutes before your meal, before your snack, and really just notice the fact that if you do take them together, if you do take a food or a drink that contains protein with your levodopa, you may see some fluctuations, lead to fluctuations in motor fluctuations I've written on the slide there, but you get what I'm trying to say. So I think that's just an important point, just to, as a reminder for you, and I know it's tricky because it means kind of timing everything, but worth bearing in mind. So the next thing I'm going to move on to is gut health. And we know that constipation is something that's reported back to me time and time again. I've got a slide there containing some foods that contain fiber. Constipation tends to affect more than 50 people with Parkinson's, even up to about more than 50% of people with Parkinson's, up to about 80% of people with Parkinson's. And dietary fiber has a laxative effect, which means that it's really useful in combating this constipation. Studies have shown that across the population in New Zealand, people don't eat enough fiber. So that's everybody, all adults in New Zealand. All the dietary surveys showed that the general population, and those studies, not in New Zealand of people with Parkinson's, but in other places, because we haven't studied in detail people with Parkinson's in New Zealand with respect to fiber intake, but fiber intake tends to be low. So what I want to do over the next few slides is just give you some top tips for fiber intake. And I'm just going to move this. I've just got a little picture of myself on the screen, so I'm just moving it so I can read the words I've got here. So these top tips for a high fiber intake, and these are something that you might think, oh yeah, I could maybe do that. So what you can do is you can add fiber-rich foods to what you ordinarily do. So those of you who have breakfast cereal, add some additional fruit or nuts or seeds. When I talk about fruit and vegetables, it doesn't have to be fresh. It can be frozen, it can be tinned, it can be dried. So any fruit and vegetables, so extra vegetables you can put in your bolognese or put in a curry or a chili if you make those kind of things. And then you can have, if you're having snack, you can have some peanut butter, which is again a source of fiber, in addition to having some like apple slices or celery sticks or whatever it might be. So you can add fiber rich foods. You can also swap things. So for instance, any of you who are bakers out there, you can swap your white flour for whole grain or wheat flour when you're baking. You can swap your bread and your pasta for wholemeal options. That's another suggestion for you. And you might think, oh yeah, I'm going to finish off the packet of white pasta I have at home and I'm going to go for a wholemeal one from now on, which gives you extra fiber. Or swapping white crackers for, maybe some vegetables like carrots or celery sticks. Or what you could also try to do is keeping a supply of frozen vegetables in the freezer. So whether that's whatever your favorite vegetable is, whether it's frozen peas or frozen carrots, whatever it might be. So you're kind of never without a supply of vegetables. As the suggestion is leaving some skin on vegetables, trying to have as many up to 5 portions of fruit and vegetable every day. As I say, it doesn't need to be fresh. But also remember, if one of your takeaways from this talk is, right, I'm going to increase my fiber intake, I'm going to try a couple of these tips that have been described, remember to drink plenty. So whether that's tea or water, to have a good amount of fluid and increase your fiber intake very gradually. Don't do it all at once. Don't do it all at once. So gradually do these sorts of things, and it really should help those of you who have reported issues with respect to constipation. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about supplements and dietary patterns, and it's really interesting because we have quite a bit of research out there, a lot of observational studies where people with Parkinson's have been studied with respect to, they've been observed as to what they do. Things have been measured. So, what do you ordinarily eat? What kind of nutrients, what kind of foods do you all ordinarily eat? But there really is a lack of clinical trials or randomized controlled trials. But like I mentioned right at the start, this is changing. So it's really, really important. So what I'm going to highlight for you in the rest of the talk, just looking at the time. So I'm going to talk about the latest research on probiotics and symbiotics, and I'll describe those in a moment. And I'm going to talk about dietary patterns. So some new research on Mediterranean ketogenic diet, some of it you'll have heard before, but there's some new research that's come from Canada where they've combined the Mediterranean and the ketogenic diet. And I want to describe the latest research on that. So probiotics, prebiotics, symbiotics. So Probiotics, like I've said on the bottom left, probiotics they're live microorganisms that are found in food, and you'll have seen them. They're found in some yogurts and what have you, and they're deemed to confer a health benefit to the host, to the person, when they're given in adequate amounts. Prebiotics are foods that let me backtrack a little bit. There's lots of bugs that live in our gut, viruses and bacteria, and that they're called the microbiome. So all those bugs live in the gut. So essentially, probiotics are foods that contain more of the bugs, more of the bacteria, for instance. So adding some bugs that come from food, adding it to what's already in the gut. Prebiotics are foods that feed the bugs that are in the gut. And then symbiotics are a combination of pre and probiotics. And interestingly, there is some promise in the latest research for constipation. So in the study, in the review article that I highlighted that we published just a couple of months ago, we've documented all of this. So there is quite a bit of research. There's been 11 randomized controlled trials, so the highest quality of trial that have investigated the effect of probiotics or symbiotics on disease severity and progression, on constipation and on motor function. And there's been no randomized controlled trial of prebiotics alone, just to highlight that. So overall, all of the trials of probiotics and symbiotics, they're showing constipation. They're showing promise for constipation. But what I'd like to highlight to you is there's real heterogeneity or differences between the trials. For instance, one of the differences is the bacterial species that were in the probiotic that was given to the people with Parkinson's in the trial. And none of the studies used the same combination of probiotics, so didn't use the same combination of bacteria in the food that the people with Parkinson's in the trial were given. And furthermore, the dose of the bacteria varied across the trial, and they didn't really justify why there's a difference between one clinical trial and other. You know, one trial tests one particular dose, another trial tests another particular dose. Additionally, the route of administration was different from one trial to another. So some trials use capsules, some use powders, some use drinks, and the comparator, because in every randomized controlled trial, you're testing a probiotic versus a comparator. What's the comparison or the control? And those comparators differed from one trial to another. So we do need trials of longer duration, that's for sure, because many of the trials were only a certain number of weeks long. So I just want to highlight that the use of biotics is showing promise for constipation only. But bear in mind that some of the bacteria in the probiotics that are for sale in the shops in New Zealand and beyond may interact with your Parkinson's medication. So I'd like you to tell your Parkinson's doctor, tell your GP, if you're taking any probiotic or any prebiotic or any symbiotic, make sure you let them know. I'm going to move on to Mediterranean dietary pattern, and then ketogenic, and then combine the two, and then wrap it up. And many of you are familiar with the fact that the Mediterranean diet is a combination of foods that are outlined in the picture here. You don't need to live in the Mediterranean to eat this way. Good news, we did a big trial in New Zealand recently for people with diabetes, so a completely different patient group, but all of the Mediterranean dietary pattern foods, actually you can get in New Zealand. And Mediterranean diet, it's a very sensible approach. It's certainly showing most promise of all the dietary patterns. It's very similar to, healthy eating compared to the New Zealand guidelines for healthy eating. It recommends foods from across all the food groups because it recommends fruit and vegetables and whole grains, some fish, some nuts, some seeds, small amount of dairy, small amount of red meat. So it is good from that respect. It can be made culturally appropriate. So whatever grains or vegetables or fruit are most appropriate to that particular culture. And some trials have been carried out in Parkinson's that have looked at the effect on non-motor symptoms, so cognition and gastrointestinal health, and again showing some promise, which is good. And I think And we know that there's a lot of evidence to show that the Mediterranean diet is good for other things like heart health, cardiovascular health. It's good for your gut because lots of fruit and vegetables and whole grains. So it is the dietary pattern that's showing most promise. Ketogenic dietary pattern very quickly. So that's high fat and low carbohydrate foods. And there's been a few trials that have looked at the ketogenic dietary pattern in people with Parkinson's, but these are very small, looking at feasibility, looking at safety, looking at efficacy, examined things like motor symptoms and some non-motor symptoms like anxiety and voice. But we need to be aware that long-term ketogenic dietary use really should be under the supervision of a dietitian. We know that in other non-Parkinson's populations, there are adverse changes to the bugs in the gut microbiome, which I mentioned. There is an increased risk of malnutrition and potentially some micronutrient deficiency, simply because the ketogenic dietary pattern suggests cutting out some food groups where those micronutrients may generally be present. And it is high in saturated fat. So it is important that that we consider those sorts of things. I think there is promise to this approach, but we're quite far away from having enough evidence to recommend ketogenic diets, and there are those safety concerns. And then finally, I mentioned the Mediterranean ketogenic combination. So a group of researchers in Canada have put the two together. They have not published their results. They're available in a preliminary unpublished way online that I've been able to have a look at. And we don't have the published results yet, but they said, yes, it's safe, but adherence to this combination of Mediterranean and ketogenic diet is difficult. So I'm going to whiz through the final few slides. Let's not forget amongst all of this that food is a key contributor to enjoyment, health and well-being. And we can get really bogged down, can't we, on the ins and outs of different nutrients and supplements. And so let's take a bigger step back and remember it's really important for our enjoyment, our health, our social connections and our well-being. So finally, what can you do today? So I've given lots of top tips and very briefly going to run through these last couple of slides. So diet diversity and variety is really important to give you all the nutrients that you need. So some foods that are whole grain, fruit and vegetables on the right-hand side, some dairy foods in the bottom right, milk and yogurt, cheese, or dairy alternatives, and then some lean meat, poultry, fish, eggs, tofu. Whether you prefer to get your protein from a plant or an animal source is fine, but diversity is the key. Fiber-rich foods we know is really important for gut health and also keeping the composition of the bugs in the gut happy. And I've circled there those grain-rich foods, those whole grain foods and fruit and veg, really important for gut health. And then I talked quite a bit about maintaining a healthy weight and the importance of just checking with your GP and your Parkinson's doctor to make sure they measure your weight each time you go to see them. So where do you find a dietitian in New Zealand? That's the website. I'll forward this on to Andrew. And I've just taken a screenshot of the website. I took the screenshot yesterday and I've circled in red the button you click which says find a dietitian. You might not be able to find a dietitian who specializes, it might not say they specialize in Parkinson's, but it may say they specialize in gut health, for instance. And if constipation is something you really want to have a chat about, that would be an option for you. Useful resources, again, I can pass these all on to Andrew from the States, from the Michael J. Fox Foundation, Parkinson's Europe, a really nice booklet from Parkinson's UK on nutrition, covering a lot of what I've talked about today, so we can make those available to you. And then, as I mentioned right at the start, before you leave today, what one change are you going to make? So maybe jot that down, and maybe starting tomorrow, you can maybe put a few more seeds on your breakfast cereal, for instance, or begin to consider that you might swap your white bread for some brown bread. So I'd like to say thank you very much, acknowledge my colleagues, the Health Research Council, University of Auckland, for funding some of this research we do, and say thank you to you. So I'll hand back to you, Andrew. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Fiona. Wow, you certainly deserve another sip of tea after
I'll have another sip of tea. Thank
Yeah,
you.
there was a lot there. Thank you so much. We certainly have learned a great deal and quite a few questions rolling in. So I'll have take the liberty of choosing which ones I present to you. And one that's been interesting me recently is the difference between male and female in Parkinson's. And the experience that women have is quite different, and typically that information is male oriented. And so I thought I'd start with that question: is there any difference in choice of diet plan for women? And also mentioned young onset Parkinson's.
You know, I totally agree that much of the research has been done on men, and not only in Parkinson. So I've been working as a researcher. I did my PhD in the late 90s, graduated in 2002. So I've been working as a researcher for that length of time. And across a variety of different populations. And you're absolutely right. Much of the research historically that's been done has been done in men. And there's an expectation that, you know, what. And it's really only in very recent years that in the field of Parkinson's that we're saying, no, hang on, we need to ensure that we include women in our research. We need to ensure that we don't sort of put everybody together, and that we look at gender differences. So in terms of nutrition, there, in terms of what I've talked about the strategies, maintaining weight, that's relevant for men and women. The importance of maintaining weight, the importance of the interaction between levodopa and protein, relevant to everybody. Gut issues are reported both by men and women, so all those tips around having fiber in your diet, all of that's relevant to both. But I totally agree that it's really important time and time again that researchers actually ensure that we really are active in recruiting more women into our research studies and trials. And I'd encourage those of you, and I know many of you on this call have taken part as participants in research, but just to do put yourself forward to ensure that we represent everybody in our research is really important. The second part of your question was around young onset Parkinson's, Andrew, and there's no studies and trials with respect to nutrition that has sort of separated the groups out. So what I covered is relevant to everybody. I guess maybe I should have premised the entire talk with there's no special diet. We don't know just yet. Is there a special diet for people with Parkinson's, young onset or not? And the answer is there isn't. There is no so there's all of these things you can try, like that will certainly help by incorporating more fiber in your diet. And not only will those fiber-rich foods give more fiber to help with constipation, but whole grain foods contain a lot more B vitamins and what have you. So they're good. There's lots of goodness in those sorts of foods, but that's across the board, young onset or otherwise.
Right. And you'll know that we had a question submitted even before the seminar started. And it's that question of diabetes and Parkinson's. And also, if you could just deal with sugar in general. I mean, I'm a lover of honey. I'll eat tons of honey. Is it good or bad for me?
So sugar in general, let's put sugar into two categories. So there's the sugar that occurs naturally in food. It occurs in fruit and dairy foods. So for instance, in fruit, we get fructose, which is a type of sugar. In milk and yogurts and what have you, we get lactose, which is a form of sugar. So those sorts of sugars appear naturally in those foods. And then the other type of sugars are the sugars we add to our food. So you mentioned honey, table sugar, or it might be found in sugary drinks, or it's found in lollies and sweets and that sort of thing. So there's breaking sugar into two categories. I want people to continue to eat fruit and dairy foods because not only does it contain like I mentioned, different types of sugar, but those foods contain so much other goodness. So if you take fruit, fiber, for instance, if you take dairy foods, calcium for bone health, protein for our muscle health. So they're the foods that, yes, contain sugar, but I want people to continue to have those sorts of foods. Really important. These ones on this hand, yeah, in moderation. These are the ones we don't, sugary drinks. There's no place really in our diet for sugary drinks. Swap them to the sugar-free ones. Lollies, look, we all have lollies from time to time or what have you. These are the ones you like to have, honey. You know what? That at the end of the day, isn't it? Like I mentioned, I had one slide on the importance of food for enjoyment and what have you. So these ones in moderation, these ones on a regular basis. So just thinking of sugar in that respect. And then your question about diabetes. So I'm unable to give individual dietary advice in a session like this. And perhaps the person who submitted that question, if they're listening, can have a chat with their diabetes dietitian, or if they're interested, go to and I'll send you the details, Andrew, so you can make it available. Go to see a dietitian specifically with the question. But in general, the dietary advice for people with diabetes overlaps very much for the dietary advice for people with Parkinson's, which is lots of whole grain foods, fruit, vegetables, some dairy, some protein containing foods, and then the other stuff, little and often in terms of the sort of the foods the sweets and the lollies and those sorts of things. So the advice for both is very much overlapping.
Right, so now we've got time for the elephant in the room, and that's the alcohol. Is my Pinot? Can I have my Shiraz with my meal? How about beer? Is it okay? Tell us, Fiona.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Look, I'm not going to tell tell everyone not to have alcohol, everything in moderation. But the guidelines in New Zealand are what are the healthy alcohol guidelines in New Zealand, and they're the ones that are available for the entire population of New Zealand. So I'm not gonna tell you to stop having your Pinot, Andrew. Absolutely, you go ahead, but just for us all to be aware of how many units per week. Men, and of course it differs between men and women, but they're the guidelines that we've got in New Zealand that are useful to take a look at.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a little bit naughty there with putting you on the spot with that one. I apologize.
No, not at all. Not at all. It's a very important question.
Yes, whether it's part of your diet or whether it's dealt with separately. There's a question here that's quite interesting, being a dairy producing country, is that has read some studies that suggest that dairy-based foods can actually increase or amplify Parkinson's symptoms. Do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, so again, this is something I get asked a lot. So there are studies that are observational only that show that people who consume dairy are at an increased risk of developing Parkinson's. So it's increased risk of developing Parkinson's. They're observational studies only. There is that's showing an association between a risk and an intake of a particular food. There's no cause and effect research whatsoever with respect to dairy. We only have observational studies, and you cannot draw cause and effect from that. And as I say, I'll just repeat again, the observational data is only around increased risk of developing Parkinson's. So somebody going from not having Parkinson's to having Parkinson's. So they're only observational studies. Interesting, but there's no cause and effect there. Data in those studies, Andrew, are mostly from America. So are there farming practices in the States that are different from other parts of the world? Or is there something in those dairy foods? But there's no intervention trials that show that dairy can adversely affect people with Parkinson's. There's no trials whatsoever.
Thank you, that's reassuring. So I'm going to combine two questions together. One is that I've been prescribed iron for my iron deficiency, but I've also read that it can affect my levodopa. And the second part of the question is, you mentioned to take it 45 minutes, 30 minutes before a meal on an empty stomach. How long do you have to wait after your meal to optimize your levodopa uptake?
So the iron question, I don't know about the interaction between iron and levodopa. I can't answer that because I just don't know. So I'm gonna have to look that one up. So I'm just making note of that. And in terms of after a meal, again, I can come back to you exactly in terms of the duration. Essentially, it's preferable not, just not to have much or any food in the stomach when levodopa is taken, and it's protein containing foods. And some people's stomachs empty quicker than others. Some people, and it also depends on what we eat. You know that if you have, I don't know, a piece of steak or a bowl of porridge, that you tend to feel fuller for longer because it stays in your tummy for longer because the steak has got protein in it, so it makes you feel full. The porridge has fiber in it, makes you feel full. So some foods stay longer in the stomach than other foods. So the trick is to take the levodopa on as empty a stomach as possible. So preferably before than after the meal, because there might be some residual food from the meal in the stomach. But I'll come back to you with what the recommendations are in minutes or hours after a meal.
Thank you. And you would agree that it's taken with a good glass of water?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because you want it to go down into the stomach and then it can make its way to make its way into the intestine for absorption. Yeah. And I think that's why I sort of drew the attention when I talked about that bit in the talk, protein and levodopa, and I put up the picture of protein containing foods and drinks. I was very cautious and very intentional to make sure there was a glass of milk on that picture, because often we kind of thinking, oh, I'll take my levodopa with a glass of milk. And that's we don't want to do that because there is protein in milk. So taking it with a glass of water is much better than taking it with a glass of milk, because there is protein in milk that will actually compete. The protein in the milk will compete with the absorption of the levodopa. Yeah, so not with milk. With water is great.
Right. So I've read about a BMI being a bit controversial these days, that culturally different cultures have different BMI, and also again the male-female split.
Yeah.
And so, and I've also been interested in noting down about discussing diet with our GPs. I'm not sure we do that. I think we go to our GPs for medicine, and we don't actually discuss diet and asking them to take our weight and to keep a track of our weight. That's not a conversation I've ever had with my GP that I can recall. But the question comes from a person who says, how do I find out what is my optimum BMI? I'm a 71-year-old Caucasian female. Where do I go? How do I work out this BMI?
Yeah, you don't have to work it out by yourself. Your GP will be able to do that for you and be able to do that with you. And and when I speak to GPs and I speak to neurologists, I do encourage them to measure your weight. As I say, you don't need to figure it out yourself. This is something that your practice nurse or your GP or your neurology doctor should be on top of. Now, it's interesting because we've been asked to write a research paper, which is essentially along the lines of what it would be useful for neurologists to know about nutrition. And weight is absolutely in there because there's so much research, so much evidence about the importance of maintaining a healthy weight. So in the paper that we're writing, which will be published in one of the medical journals and read by neurologists, we're saying make sure that you measure people's weight. So what I'd love if people on this call, next time you're at your GP, and it doesn't have to be a Parkinson's related visit, ask them to measure your weight and document it. And then you have over time, every time you go in, it only takes a couple of seconds for them to pop you on the scales, and then they're able to see over time whether you're maintaining. So that's up to them to work out your body mass index. They might measure your height as well. They will, if they want to work out your body mass index, they'll measure your weight and height. So that is up to them to take care of.
Great. So I think we've got time for just one more question. And there was that word. Unfortunately, I can't read my handwriting.
Sarcopenia. I know, it's a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah. And so we're losing muscle mass as we get older naturally.
Yes.
And I've read that taking protein, a protein supplement, is a way to slow the loss of muscle mass. But of course, it's the enemy of levodopa, as you've discussed today. So one of the questions is there what would you recommend in terms of a plant protein supplement? Would you recommend we take it to slow down muscle mass loss? And if it is a plant protein the ideal one to take as a supplement?
So ordinarily, as a dietitian, we always go for a food first approach. And you can absolutely get all the protein you need from food. You don't need to go and purchase a rather expensive protein supplement. So I would say get the protein you need from foods. So whether that's the plant sources of protein, the nuts and those that I had on the slide, or dairy foods. So you might have extra yogurt or whatever it might be, or an extra glass of milk. So you don't need a protein supplement unless you think, oh, but when I'm out and about, it's easier to have a supplement than it is to take a food with me. But ordinarily, you will be able to. In New Zealand, we have access to lots of protein containing foods. The reason we go for foods rather than supplements is a variety of reasons, but the main reason is if you have a food that contains protein, that food contains lots of other goodness. So again, let's consider a glass of milk. It's got protein in it. It also has calcium in it and lots of vitamins and minerals and calcium really important for our bone health as we get older, and decreases our, if our bones are healthy, it decreases our risk of having a fracture. A protein supplement only contains protein, whereas food, which contains protein, also contains lots of other good stuff in it. And you said, oh, protein's the enemy of levodopa. It's a tricky one, that. I think it's all about timing, isn't it? And I recognize how challenging it is for you, because you might be taking levodopa 3, 4, 5 times a day. And then you're thinking, how am I going to fit my meals in? I have to have it before and I have to have it after. It's a real challenge. If you do go and speak to a dietitian, that's absolutely something they'll work through with you and help you really work out the timing. But it is something to be intentional about, because what happens if we don't get enough protein, we will begin to, it's not that we'll begin to lose muscle mass. That happens anyway with aging, but it'll happen faster. So it is really important to get enough protein in every day. And again, a dietitian would be able to give you the exact calculations as to how much is enough for you. We actually need more protein as we get older than a younger person. The recommendations increase, but that is a real challenge for people with Parkinson's. There is no doubt.
So our time is up, but I want to just squeeze in one more question, if I may, because I think it's going to be one that's really important. Someone's asking about heartburn, reflux, maybe stomach cramping. Is that the food we're eating? Is that our stomachs just reacting to something? And what do you recommend as a solution?
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that, because they're pretty nasty things to happen. Gosh, it's very hard for me to say exactly what. It may be a side effect of a medication. It may be some food that's been consumed, but I would definitely recommend go and chat to your GP about that, because those kind of things are pretty nasty and are probably deterring that person from eating as well as they could. Then there's the thing of, then they'll begin to weight loss, and that could increase your risk of getting an infection and blah, blah, blah. That sort of, so I suggest going along to speak to your GP about that, to see if there are medications that can be swapped, or are there any foods that can be, changed to really to get on top of those symptoms, because that sounds pretty, not very pleasant for that person.
Well, Fiona, thank you. I think my takeaway today is that we should add a dietitian to that team of people we use it as Parkinson's to help us get through the day, because it's just so important, the food we eat. And it might be something that we're eating that we can just change, that would make life better, or add something to our diet that would certainly make things. And many of us spend, like you said, hundreds of dollars on supplements, probably not knowing really whether the supplement is working, but just taking it because we're desperate and we're hoping. I think us Parkies are sort of sitting ducks to the next thing that comes over the hill that says this will fix your Parkinson's, or this will stop your tremor, or this will do this, or this will do that. So having an informed approach to what we eat is probably the best. So again, thank you, Fiona. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for your interest in the Parkinson's community. We really appreciate you and all that you do, all that research, all that hours of thinking on our behalf. So thank you so much for your expertise. Just to remind listeners, you will receive an email in a few days' time with a link once we put this up on our YouTube channel, so you'll be able to listen again. And Fiona has mentioned that she'll make some resources available, and we'll make sure that you get those too. So if you've registered for this webinar, all those resources will come your way in the next few days. Thank you so much for your interest. Again, thank you for the response to the webinar today. It's been absolutely fabulous. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, everyone. And eat well, enjoy life, and have the occasional glass of red wine, apparently. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Andrew.
Bye.